Why don't we get started? I'm assuming that everybody can see my screen. We'll just do the same, have the same question for you. Niryev, please let me know. Am I saying your name right? Niryev? Just give me a yep. Perfect. Okay. I'll try and keep it that way the whole time. So I'm assuming everybody can see my screen. I know you can hear me because you're responding, so we should be good to go. I've got a quick question for you guys. Are you guys a night person or a morning person? I'm always interested in people in this industry, whether you're a morning person or a night person. Chanel is a morning person. Okay, so this is perfect for you. Then actually, it's probably a little late, isn't it? Niryev, morning, depending on the situation. Okay. I happen to be a night person. You'll find me online sometimes 10, 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning sometimes. It's just how it is. Yeah, it's just kind of interesting. I find it curious how different people work. So let's just jump into this. We usually leave the chat closed while I'm presenting, just simply because there can be feedback. But at some point, because there's only two of you, what I'll do is I'll just open the whole thing up and we can just have a conversation. This is an excerpt from the programs that we run. If you're not aware, we run a coaching business. And what I do is I extract some of the information out of our coaching programs that our clients are using, and I just give it away. And that's kind of what this is. And the pricing of your joinery question is really an interesting question. A lot of people sort of agonize over this one. A question for both of you. How do you do your pricing right now? Is there some sort of a spreadsheet? Do you have some sort of a system that you use? Let me know what it is you're doing right now, just in a short sentence, because we're here to learn about how to price your joinery, and it helps me to know sort of how you're currently doing it. I know, what I often find is that working with a lot of people over the years, we quite often find some bizarre spreadsheet that someone's inherited, or some weird and funky method of coming up with a price. And I'm always interested to find out how other people are doing it, because when I ran my own joinery business, I had a weird way of pricing, and it didn't always produce the results that we want. So Niryev says, I've got a spreadsheet and a database version too. Shanoa, can you just tell me how you're doing your pricing? Depending on job, linear meter rate, or just workout quantities and labor. I also have a rate for cut size materials. Okay, so one thing that, just to give you a little bit of background, we'll go through this relatively quickly. I ran my own joinery business for quite a while, and then I had a number of people come in and help me with how to improve my business. This is one area that a gentleman by the name of Norm Starling, who was an industry consultant, came in, and he essentially turned my business around. And he taught me about what we call cost plus pricing. And it's the most basic thing in the entire world. There's nothing new about this. I think an old guy taught Norm, and Norm was about 60 when he was teaching me. So, and this is back in 97. So, so there's nothing new about this method. It's just a really simple, straightforward, easy to follow method for coming up with pricing. But it also makes sure that if you win the job, you're going to make profit. I will also say that the beginning of this is kind of step two. We're talking about pricing. Step one is really about making sure that by the time you get to pricing, you've already won the work. I know that sounds a little bit out there, but if you've done attract really well, because what primarily we struggle with as tradesmen and as typically as shop owners, we struggle with things that we're not particularly good at, or things that we weren't trained at, and that has a tendency to be marketing and sales. So consequently, what happens is we're great at making stuff, and this is one of the greatest issues out in the industry right now, is that most joinery businesses are run by cabinet makers that haven't transitioned into being a business owner, and that's a big problem, because you're not a tradesman anymore. You're running a business, and you've got to figure out how to run a business and make it successful. So delivering great work is really what your employees need to do, or what your business needs to do. What you need to do is make a business that has repeatable systems and processes, because usually we're pretty comfortable in the factory, and focusing on the work in the factory is it's a more natural place for us to be, and we've got to force ourselves out of our comfort zone, because otherwise what happens is we end up spending days on end working on quotes, or just rushing through things and not really understanding that having a great number of quotes and winning not very many of them is really not helpful for the business. So without a good system to follow, it's a little bit like playing darts blindfolded. So ultimately what the result is you're kind of sitting at your desk either with a big pile of quotes still to be done, or you've done a heap of them and lost a heap of them. Or I don't know about you guys, but when I was running my business and I wasn't doing a particularly good job of it, I would have sort of this immediate high and this immediate low. As soon as we'd win a job, I would feel this great sense of euphoria because I'd won this job. And then I would kind of have this, oh shit moment. We've won this job. Now I'm not sure if I priced it right. And I'm not even sure if we're going to be able to get it done on time. So there was this immediate high and this immediate low. Does that sound familiar, guys? Usually it's it's one of those things that everybody kind of relates to. It's like this hunt, but then when you win the hunt, it's like, oh no, what am I going to do now? So I'll throw it back on you guys. Is there anything else, like you've taken time out of your day, which I very much appreciate. I really enjoy running these things because I think there's a lot of value. I know when I taught the stuff, it turned my business around. Norm taught me how to do cost plus pricing, which I'm going to teach you. And it took me from let's just say a break even, or maybe even a loss position in my business. Let's call it break even, shall we? And it took me up to about 16 or 70% net profit in 1 year. And it was a very dramatic turnaround in my business. There were a number of things that had to happen to make that happen, but this was the single most important thing that I did. So I'm just going to ask you guys a question. What other issues or what other things are you hoping to get from this session? So I know that I'm going to go through this relatively quickly, but what are the specific things that you want to see here today? If there's no specific things and you're just here for the ride, that's fine too. But it's great if you can ask a specific question, then I can come up with some specific answers as I'm going through this. It would be good to learn a new pricing method. You tend to get stuck in your old ways. Yep, that's very true. How the pricing can be set for a more profitable business. Okay, perfect. So that's perfect. That's exactly what we're going to do. The one thing I can tell you is that in business, probably the one thing that would make people really happy is if you're making a really healthy profit and that's going to continue forever. That's true for every business, my business included. So that's what this system does. And believe me, there's no reason why you would have different methods for different joinery. Because if you have one method that produces one result, in other words, one pricing system that produces a known amount of profit, then you've achieved your goal in business. And if you have multiple ways of doing that, it just makes it more complex. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through one method. But again, I want to draw your attention to the fact that the focus prior to pricing really needs to be on making sure that you win the work, not how do we price the work. Now, obviously, it's important that you know how to price the work so that you can make the profit that you want. But the previous function or the previous focus really needs to be on your conversion rate. And that is one of the things we help people with a lot as well. And that comes down to marketing and placing yourself in the marketplace as an expert and getting people to want your stuff prior to even contacting you. Question for both of you guys. Do you know what your conversion rate is? Oh, hey, David's on the line. So I'm going to say hello to David. We've really got 3 jobs: to attract the perfect client, to convert that client to a paying customer, and then to deliver the work to them perfectly. And if we can do all 3 of those things as a business, we're doing pretty well. So remember, focus on conversion rate, because if you know what your conversion rate is, it's really not about doing more work necessarily if you have a lowish conversion rate. It's really first about how are we going to increase your conversion rate. So if you're, if you're producing quotes for 10 people, you want to sell at least 9 of them, I would think. For me, 90% or higher is about where we want our conversion rates to be. I would just put a little bit of social proof in here. This is a client of mine by the name of Chris. He is using the system I'm about to show you, and it turned his business around completely. It turned his business from, well, let's just say a very average looking financial outcome to one that he now says things like, for the first time in business, I feel there's a future for him and his kids, his wife and his kids. And it's just obviously it's a wonderful feeling. Like, we've taken him from a very, very sort of an average financial position to something that's extremely healthy. Now, Chris, when he started out, we still don't have any CNC machinery. We don't have any automation, but now the business is in a financial position only after 12 months where we can go out and get those things and then escalate the business again from there. I'm assuming all of you, Shanoa, David, Niryev, I'm assuming you run CNC equipment in your factory. Just chuck in a chat, say yes. So Chris doesn't have any CNC equipment yet, which makes this result even more impressive because he's got the old panel saw. They hand drill a lot of their stuff. It's still a lot of handmade cabinet making in the factory. And we've taken that very basic labor intensive business into a cash positive position, into a profit positive position, which by the way is almost impossible to do in this day and age. And now we're going to be able to scale it up by getting machinery. So it's pretty cool. And Chris will tell you that the main thing that made this happen was his pricing system. So a real simple question for you guys. And you can just, again, type this into the box. There are, in your business, and this is true with every joinery business, so there are really only 3 areas of your business where you have areas of cost. And I'd ask everyone, what would those 3 areas be? 3 cost centers. What are they? Labor, materials, and overhead. Okay, very good. Labor, materials, and overhead. Okay, excellent. Labor, materials, yep, and overhead. So those definitely are, if you look at your, I think there's a profit and loss. Yeah, so if you look at your profit and loss statement, hopefully it should look like something like this. You'll be able to go through these line by line by line by line and put each one of these lines into either labor, into material, or into overhead. There really is no other things in your business as far as major cost centers. So if we're all in agreement there, and I encourage everyone to challenge everything I say, because sometimes we think differently after we challenge things. The one thing I can tell you is I've looked at literally thousands and thousands and thousands of joinery businesses. And there's one line item that consistently proves itself to be the most consistent line item of all of these line items. Anybody want to take a guess at what line item that would be? Niryev says labor. David says wages. So it's an interesting response. You probably feel a little bit like you're being set up here, and I apologize for that. But my question for you is, after you do a job, do you find that you've done it exactly at the time that you've allowed, or does that consistently blow out? Blows out, right. So there's no way wages could be accurate. So what we find though is if we sit back and think about this, I don't know about you, but I probably think about this stuff way too much. If we think about this as people, as tradesmen, yeah, it blows out. Everybody agrees it blows out, absolutely. So if we think about who we are as people, we're technicians. We are tradespeople who know the details. So I'm willing to bet that if you guys are like a typical tradesman, if I was to throw a drawing of a kitchen in front of you, within a very short period of time, you could come up with what the materials are. You'd be able to look at it and say, okay, I used to look at a kitchen and say the number of cabinets, that's how many sheets they're going to be of whiteboard. And if there was a pantry, there's 2 sheets, a corner cabinet is 2 sheets. So we're able to know with a very high degree of certainty what the materials are, because that's kind of how our brain works. We're technicians. We see the details. And so for that reason, what we find is that this line item on the vast majority of joinery businesses is very, very consistent. Now, let me just clarify what consistency means. This is your actual cost here, and this is a percentage that we measure against your revenue. So this is the percentage against revenue. So all you do is you take whatever this number here is, you divide it by your revenue and multiply by 100, and you come up with your percentage. And the best way to have your profit and loss statement work out is just like you see it here, just exactly like you have these percentages running down the side here. This is the best way to have your profit and loss set up, because what this is like, it's like a car dashboard. As these percentages fluctuate, it'll alert you to a good thing or a bad thing. So a question for everybody on the line right now: do you have current profit and loss statements every single month that are reconciled and accurate, that you're looking at on a month-by-month basis? Just a yes or a no. David says not yet. Tell me, David, how often do you have a look at your profit and loss record? Is it every couple of months? Tell me how often it is. Annually, okay. Shanoa says yes, generally, okay. Okay, so I'm not going to underplay this. This is the single most important thing you can do in your business. I'll tell a little story. So just bear with me on this. It'll make sense in the end. Imagine this. Imagine you're driving across the Nullarbor on a 45-degree day. You got 3 screaming kids in the back. You're driving an old car that is known to overheat, and it's a 45-degree day. Kids are screaming. You're towing a caravan, so the car is under stress. This car is known to overheat, and it just so happens today that your temperature gauge isn't working. How are you feeling? You're driving along, 3 screaming kids in the back, no air conditioning. This is a 1974 Kingswood, and you don't know what's going to happen. Like, at any given point, the engine could blow up and overheat, and you wouldn't know. The answer, I would assume, is you're feeling pretty stressed, right? Because there's nothing in front of you that tells you what's about to happen or how things are going. So think of this profit and loss much like your car dashboard. You wouldn't dream of driving your car down the road without having the dashboard in front of you. And if we think about what the dashboard actually does for us, let's just say that you are driving down the road in your car and your temperature gauge is working, and you notice that the temperature is going up a little bit. You notice that, but it's not critical yet, but you keep an eye on it. And then if that happens to get up into close to the red zone, you pull the car over by the side of the road and you phone the mechanic and say, there's something wrong with my cooling system. I need you to fix that. If you didn't have those gauges, the engine would blow up. You'd call the mechanic and say, the car doesn't work anymore. It's a very, very, very different conversation, because your indicators or your dashboard is actually telling you where something good or bad is happening. And you can make a very, very quick business decision on facts of what is actually happening in your business. So this is like digging into the heart and soul of your business, or the brain of your business, and giving you information. Now, as a business owner, this is actually really critical, because you have to make business decisions, certainly more than monthly. You're making business decisions every single day. So, it's critical that you have information in front of you so that you can make good business decisions. Without it, the image of the guy playing darts blindfolded is exactly what I picture. If you had a good month and you don't know it, how do you make a business decision as to what to do this month or the next month? So my advice to everybody on the line right now is, if you don't have a bookkeeper, get a bookkeeper. They're not that expensive. It's only maybe $100, $200 a month at most. They're pretty inexpensive. Or find someone that'll do the books for you, and get your profit and loss reconciled and accurate every single month, so that you can then sit down and analyze this every month. With every single one of my clients, it's a requirement. We have to know, if we're going to be doing some business improvement projects, we have to know what, if we implemented those last month, we need to know what were the results. Did they improve? Did we reduce material costs? And the other thing I'll tell you when we're talking about profit and loss statements is that make sure that your production wages are here in costs of sales. this is a little takeaway I'll give you. Make sure that your wages for production, not if you have a salesman or if you have office staff, but production wages should be in here, because we want to monitor what your wages for production against revenue is. And if you're around the 18 to 20% mark, you're about industry standard. I'm just going to pause for a second and just ask, is everybody getting this? Are you picking up what I'm putting down? Is there something about what I just said that resonates with you? Let me know what you think, and we'll move on. All good? Good so far? All good? Where would you put office staff? Office staff is overhead. So think about it this way. If you have a quote, and we're going to go into the quoting in a second, but if you have a quote and you allow labor to produce a job, so what's that going to be? Maybe a little bit of drawing. Maybe you've got some drawing that needs to be done. That goes in your quote. That is, could be production for wages. Wages for production. But you've certainly got your CNC operator or your machining guy or girl. You've got your assembly. You've got maybe paint staff. All those things that physically have their hands on the product, those are production wages. Anybody else, like a good example is salespeople. If they never sold anything through the month, you still have to pay them, and they go into overhead. So we'll go into that a little bit more in a second. But I think it's also important to be really, really clear on what else your quote does. So when you produce a quote, this is a really, really important document for your business. And I work with a lot of people that just initially when we start working, we just want to get a price. We just want to get a price really, really quick. But then, of course, when you win the job, then you're assigned with the task of doing what? You've got to figure out what the materials are, right? Materials. We then got to figure out what the labor is. We've got to figure out all these things, and it could already be done in your quote. So if your quote contains all of these things that you can just hand off when you win the job to the next person, or even better, we can have it in a system. Some of you might have seen JobMan. JobMan's a good option out there, where all our quoting is done within JobMan. And then when we win the work, it automatically transitions into production, and all of that explodes into the factory automatically. That's the best outcome, because winning the work quickly, but then having somebody else in the business needing to spend an enormous amount of time to discover what it was that was quoted, and how are they going to order these materials, and what are the materials, and going back and forth, really doesn't make the speed of quoting valuable at all, because now you've had somebody else in the business required to spend an enormous amount of time figuring out what the hell just happened. So sometimes it's better if we take a little bit longer in the quoting process to make sure that when you win the work, and if you're at a 60 to 70% conversion rate, there's no question that someone's going to need this information. So I won't go too deep into that, but I think it's a really, really, really important point that speed of quoting is not necessarily the important thing. Handing off the information is the important thing, so that we're not having to recreate the information and rediscover the information in production. That's not what should happen. When the job hits production, what should happen is we just verify the labor rates that were allocated in quoting. Did it happen or didn't it happen? It's sort of a yes or a no. And then the materials, the bill of materials that's in the quote, really we just need to order it here and get it on time. So that's really what we're looking at. Okay. Any questions about anything? I'll bring everybody online. If anybody has a question or a comment or anything like that, just let me know. And before I jump into the next stage here, I'm actually going to jump right into the gold. So before we do that, just let me know. Yes. Is there anything that you'd like me to go over again? Question, comment, anything like that? Hopefully everybody's still awake. All good. David says all good. Following so far. All good. Excellent. Okay. So if we think back to our profit and loss statement. And I'm just going to present a hypothetical. In order to run through this as a scenario, I find it's best if I actually come up with some hypothetical numbers. Business ABC does this, if that makes sense. So I'll just run through it in this scenario, and then we can talk about how you might apply this in your business. So I think it's fair to say that if you're running a business, you should know what your revenue in the coming month is going to be. And revenue is work that you're going to invoice for. Whether you collect that money or not is a different story. We're not going to talk about that. That's cash collection. That's another issue. But let's just say that the work you're about to do in the coming month should be pretty well known. So let's just say hypothetically you had, in the month coming up, you had $100,000 worth of work that you're going to invoice for. And let's just say that we did our own analysis on our, I'll just go back here just so you know where I'm coming from. We did our own analysis on our profit and loss. And we know that consistently, not just 1 month, but consistently, this number here is, let's just say it's 40%. 40% is a good business. What that means is that 40% out of all the revenue that you collect is going to pay for your materials on a fairly consistent basis. Now, if that fluctuates between 41 and 42 or 39, it doesn't really affect things too much. So it's best just to come up with an average percentage that your business is actually doing. This isn't something that we make up. We let the business actually tell us what it's doing. Because our goal here is to make sure that when you quote a job, you're covering the 3 cost centers. You're covering labor first, materials, and overhead, and then we're going to mark up for profit from there. So let's just say, for the purposes of this exercise, that we know that the materials of revenue is 40%. Okay, so those are the first numbers that we want to work with, because these are numbers that the business is telling us. I look at it kind of this way. A business is like a building, and some buildings have cracks in the walls. Some businesses have a lot of cracks in the walls. And the building is full of cash, and the cash is either creeping out the cracks, or we're going to patch the cracks. What we're doing here is we're patching the cracks in the wall so that the cash that you bring in, you get to keep more of it. It doesn't end up seeping through the cracks. Hopefully that makes sense. So those are the first thing. This is number 1 and number 2. And again, this is just simple business analysis. The third thing that we need to do is we need to figure out what your actual overhead costs are. And this is a hard number that is going to be an average number. So let's say over the course of 6 months or 9 months. Sometimes you can get your accountant or your bookkeeper to tell you. But like I said earlier, if you go through your P&L and you tick boxes as whether it's a labor line item, material line item, or an overhead line item, we'll be able to come up with a number for what your monthly overhead cost is. And your monthly overhead cost has zero labor-related costs in it. So let's just assume, for the purpose of this exercise, that we've discovered that your monthly overhead costs are $10,000. Okay, so we know that you're going to have an invoiced revenue for this month of $100,000. We know that 40% of that is going to go towards materials. And we know that you have to somehow in your quoting system come up with an amount that's going to cover your overhead. Okay, so now, and I'm not a maths kind of guy, but this is actually pretty simple maths, because what we know here is that of this, I'll just do my notes down here, of this $100,000 in revenue, let me do that again. Of this $100,000 in revenue, 40,000 of that is going to go towards paying materials. And that's going to be, like we said, because we've looked at your business and we know that consistently this 40% is what you're doing. If we looked at your labor, it's probably going to fluctuate wildly because the reality is different than the estimate. But we know that this 40% is what you're going to spend on materials every month. So what we can do is we can take this 40% and say, we also know that we've got $100,000 to make up somewhere. Why don't we just come up with a percentage to mark up your material so that it covers this much? Okay, well, that makes sense. all you do is you take your $10,000 and divide it into your $40,000, and we end up with 25% in this case. Okay, so we know that if we add 25% to $40,000, we get 10,000. Okay, well those are simple numbers that we can use when we quote work, job by job by job. So here is the simple spreadsheet for cost plus calculations. I say it's a simple spreadsheet, but you still have to make sure that it's accurate in the materials that you're putting in here and the labor. Now, the thing is, the labor, as we said earlier, is probably going to be inaccurate. So we keep that out of the scenario as far as overhead calculations. I'll just pause for a second here and just ask, did everybody understand that scenario I went through, or do I need to cover something again? Because if this is new, it takes a little bit. For some of my clients, it takes 3 months to get their head around this. So just let me know if you follow that. Everything's okay. David says okay. Area of Shanoa, are you still with us? I know it's pretty basic maths. We're not. Makes sense? Okay. All right, so we've got some numbers, and keep in mind that this is what your business is telling us. I'm not making anything up here. We would work with you and your business and figure out what's actually happening. So from this perspective, it's really a challenge for you to make sure that the information you're putting in here is accurate, and then the calculation will then require your business, if you win this work, to make profit. So however you come up with your bill of materials, this can be a spreadsheet, this can be whatever you want. In reality, if you're using Cabinet Vision, for example, and you draw the job, the materials are going to be 100% accurate, and you're not going to have to think about it. There's no room for human error. So in many, many ways, it makes a whole lot more sense to draw the job in Cabinet Vision first as a way of coming up with a price, because then everything is going to be dead accurate. Your materials are going to be right. And let's face it, if you're running a CNC, you have to draw the job anyway to send it to your CNC. So most of my clients that are doing exceptional work in pricing are drawing the work as a way of pricing. They get very quick at it, but the result of drawing the work in Cabinet Vision means that we can then populate a database or a spreadsheet like this and be very, very accurate with our pricing. I'll also say that in actual fact, if you're using the bid center in Cabinet Vision, it uses these same types of calculations. Okay, so if you know your materials, so we've got board, 20 of them, times whatever, you get this amount here. Doors, 1 door, so as you go through your bill of materials, you would populate your bill of materials. I imagine you're doing some of this now anyway. This is important because you're going to have to order this stuff. And what's important is that this cost is your actual cost that you would pay your supplier. A little word of warning here, don't put any fudge factors on any of your materials, because ultimately what you want is to be able to take this system into the next level system where we can create purchase orders from your bill of materials. And the purchase orders are going to have your actual cost from your supplier on the purchase order. So this line item here is going to be what you would actually pay your supplier. My advice is, if you want to fudge the number a little bit, so let's just say you have someone that is a PITA. I'm not sure if you guys know what PITA is, but it stands for pain in the ass. If you have a customer that is a PITA, maybe add 1,500 in here as a line item. Yeah, but if you keep it separate, if you keep it as a separate line item, I actually ask everybody to commit to becoming 100% accurate, 100% accuracy in your quoting. In other words, if you're going to pay, in this case here, $1,000 for your board, that's actually what you're going to pay for your board. If your color board is going to be 700, that's actually what you're going to. So we want to have 100% accuracy so that we can get 100% close to the profit margin you want to make. The more this spreadsheet gets watered down and inaccurate, the closer or the farther away you're going to get from your end goal, which is a profit that you want. So if you keep everything accurate, everything's cool. So just to work through this, we've got some line items and we've got some cost totals here for materials. And then what happens here is we take our percentage and we start marking up our materials. In this case here, it's going to be 25%. Now, again, we've already said that we're going to spend $40,000 this month in materials across a whole number of jobs. This is just one of them. And in order to figure out how that $40,000 is going to be added up, it's going to be line by line by line by line by line by line, all the materials we're purchasing. So if we're adding a little bit into each material that we purchase every single month, it should eventually add up to this $10,000. In other words, we're leaving enough meat on the bone to cover our $10,000 overhead by way of this 25% markup. Now, I'm just going to pause again. Does that make sense? Cool. All right. David says yes. 2 more people on the line. Shanoa, Niriev. It's okay to, if I have to go over this again, that's fine. Should stone bench tops be in materials? Probably. It all depends. Your 40% that we came up with when we looked at your P&L, it should be in that. So that's a great question. Let me just go back here a little bit. Go back to the P&L. Make sure nothing's missing. So in other words, let's not have any cracks in the walls. So line by line by line by line by line by line. You can go through all of these and make sure that they are assigned. Every single line item has to have an assignment. And it's going to be either labor, or it's going to be overhead, or it's going to be materials. So we have to make sure that whatever you're doing, it's consistent and it's always the same. So if it's not going to be materials, what would it be? If it's not assigned in any of those 3, it's a crack in the wall. Hopefully that made sense, Shanoa? Yeah. So put everything that is like that in materials. And keep in mind too, this is, we're talking about hard, cold numbers here, but we are also talking about averages. We know that 25% is going to be about enough to cover your materials. We know that $10,000 for your overhead is going to fluctuate month by month. But what you want is a consistent pricing system that's going to get you the profit that you want in business. So the cool thing about this is that we've now got a 25%. So we've got a dial. So look at this. Think of this like a dial that you can turn. 25%, you could make it 27% if you find that you're not making the profit that you want, or you're not covering your overhead. Maybe your overhead goes up and you've got to change this, or maybe it goes down and you can become more competitive. So we've now got a really simple little tweak dial that we can adjust and change if we need to. And then what you do is you say, well, okay, how much profit do I want to make? Let's just say you want to make 15% net profit in business. Then you put 15% in here. So keep in mind that we haven't yet talked about labor. I've intentionally kept labor right out of this scenario, but it is a very important topic. And you'll notice that here, there is no consideration for overhead calculation. That's simply because these labor rates, as we said earlier, are not going to be accurate. If we put the overhead calculation in here, it would make the percentage number lower, but it would also make the result less accurate, because these things here are not going to be right. But these things here probably are going to be right. So for that reason, I don't have labor as part of my overhead calculation, but we have a very, very specific and targeted plan to say, these are the hours that you've assigned for machining, for painting, for assembling, for delivery, for whatever those numbers are. Those numbers have to go to the person that's doing that task. So I don't know if you're taking notes, but this is a really important area to take a note on, because this area right here is one of your biggest problems. Most of you said they blow out, the hours blow out. That's something that we can solve. Without going into too much detail here, I try to keep these down to about an hour, these little sessions, but there's a little law out there, a little I don't know what you'd call it, but there's a law called Parkinson's law. If anybody's ever heard of it, just give me a yes. Parkinson's law essentially states work will expand to fill the space given to it. And I really like this little law, because if you think about it, if you think about what this means, in our daily lives, we have things like tubes of toothpaste, right? And you've got this big, huge tube of toothpaste. When you first get it, you put a whole heap of toothpaste on your toothbrush and you just kind of go crazy. And then when the toothbrush gets down to a quarter or less left in the tube, you're being really, really frugal with what's left, right? And that's because we thought we had all this stuff to work with, but in the end, we don't, we want to get frugal at the end. So how we put this into context for work is that if you give your people, your workers in your factory, the exact same task 10 times with no parameters around how long it should take them to do it, what will happen is they will take 10 different rates of time to complete that same task. That's not their fault. That's just what humans do. If you say to them, I need you to complete this by the end of the day, they complete it by the end of the day, and maybe it should have only taken 4 hours. Okay, so we need to tighten up our timelines, but also give them targets to shoot for. Now, those targets have to be fair times that they agree to that it should take them to do these tasks. So you can do it one of two ways. You can time them for a few months and say, this is how long it takes you. It does because I've timed you for 2 or 3 months. Or you can say, this is how long I think it should take you. And what I need you to do is to tell me how long it actually took you so that you can then tweak and adjust your quote as you move forward. But when you have a spreadsheet like this, you can take these hours that you've got here and put that into a work order for your factory and just have them say, look, it's actually taking me 2 hours today and 4 hours tomorrow, and just start calculating. It's just the time that you want to know. And that's the important thing, so that you can then see that in actual fact, your quoting systems are blowing out, most likely because, well, it's one of two things. Most likely it's because you haven't allowed enough time. But the second thing, and the easiest thing to fix, is it's blowing out because you haven't actually told them how long it should take them to do it. Okay, so we've got our material costs here. We've got our overheads calculated here. So this is material covered. This is overhead covered. And this is labor covered. Those are the 3 cost centers that we should know are covered for cost. If you do this well, and if you do it accurately, and you win a job, and you've put 15% net profit in here, and your projected revenue is exactly what it should be, and everything is basically in sync and in balance, any guesses what your net profit month by month by month would be? Just type in a percentage, or type in a percentage what you think your net profit would be. 15%, that's right. Question for everybody on the line right now. I'm not going to ask what your net profit is, but is everybody above 10% net profit in business right now as we speak? Just a yes or a no. You know, is around that? Yes. David says yes, around 10%. Niriev, are you with us? Okay, so 10% for me is break even. I think that if a business like a joinery business doesn't produce anything better than 10%, anything less than 10% for me is considered a loss. Simply for the reason that there's too much risk. There's too many variables that can happen. If you work for builders, they can go broke tomorrow. There's far too much risk for you not to be making more than 10%. So my target is 10% is our break-even point, and we actually have a target of 25 to 27% net profit. I do have a couple of clients doing that right now, but it takes 2 or 3, maybe 4 years of tweaking. But I'll tell you what, it's worth it, because these guys are now business owners that have got their feet up and they're really enjoying their lives. And that's ultimately what we want in business. You could have a business where you choose to work in it because you love doing it, but I think it needs to be a choice. It shouldn't be a requirement. Otherwise, it's much like an employment. And I think that there's far too much to risk than to have your business relying on you, because quite frankly, you're a human. You're not that reliable. You're going to break at some point. And we've got to have a business that has systems that are break-proof and foolproof, so that you can choose to be there or not. You're adding value, but ultimately the business needs to be running on its own, and it's an investment for you that's paying you back. Does that make sense? Let me know if that makes a little bit of sense to anyone. I know it does to me, because I personally don't want a business that is a burden on my shoulders. I want a business that is fun, enjoyable, and I'm able to help as many people as possible, is generating the wealth that I want in life, but also gives me the freedom that I want in life. And that's where the risk comes into it. For the risk that you're putting up, you'd really have to be getting those three things back: your personal freedom, your wealth, and you need to get some joy from what you're doing. Okay, so a little bit of feedback from everyone. Let's see if everybody's got a microphone. I'll allow everyone to talk. So everybody should be able to talk right now. Let me know if you can hear me. And if not, just let me know. I really like to know what it was from this little presentation that you found valuable. David's got no mic. Can hear Shanoa.
Hello.
G'day.
How you going?
I'm excellent. How are you?
Yeah, good, mate. Yeah, I thought a bit of inspiration was good at the end there, and yeah, it was a fairly simple method, really.
It is. Yeah.
The labour costs. Did you? I don't know if I missed it. Did you work out what's the best way to work out your hourly labour cost?
Another workshop.
Yep.
Look, it's you've got two choices here. You come up with a system, and I have another sort of a presentation I can do in a little bit. That's it's based on what we call standard unit of measure, and from having a standard unit of measure, we can assign labor per job. There's a little bit of detail to it, but we can help you with a manual system to guessing what your labor is going to be. But I have to tell you that no matter what happens, unless you actually are drawing your work and having the computer calculate what your labor is, that's consistent, it's always going to be a human guess. And for that reason, there's going to be some wild fluctuations in it. So do you draw your work now?
Yes, yeah, on Cabinet Vision.
Okay, so this is a chicken and an egg question. I have this conversation quite a lot. David says everything looks like makes sense, and it's just getting things in place and get the systems working. Draw some first. Yeah. I'll also tell you that we're working closely with JobMan. Now, this isn't a JobMan sales pitch in any way, shape, or form, but I'm always looking for software that really helps my clients. And obviously, if you've got Cabinet Vision, that's another one that I recommend. The great thing about a system like JobMan is that you can either have the quoting system exactly like this spreadsheet that you see here. I have made this exact spreadsheet in JobMan so that you can use this spreadsheet exactly as it is, or you can import from Cabinet Vision into JobMan and then have all this information already made for you. Which one do you think would be more comfortable for you?
Oh, I don't know, probably stick with Cabinet Vision, I guess, because I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, and it's when you draw it, it's that it's not. It never makes a mistake, really. Now, we're not going to get into whether Cabinet Vision is programmed right or not, but it's going to know how many square meters of board there are, and it's always accurate. David's asking about Python. I don't know about the integration with Python and JobMan, but I'm assuming that we'd be able to have a report exported out of Python, imported into JobMan. It's a good question for JobMan. But look, this system here needs to be accurate, but it also needs to be created in such a way that the information can then flow on to everybody else in the business that needs this information, right? So your purchasing department needs to purchase this material. They shouldn't be asked to figure out what the material is or what the quantity is. They should just be asked to purchase it. Your labor can go to the people doing that labor. They should be told how long has been allocated for that task. But you're absolutely right. It's simple. And the biggest takeaway most people have, I think, and I had this, God, it's nearly 30 years ago, I was making this way too complicated. The biggest struggle for me in presenting this to most people in the joinery industry is because it seems so easy and simple, it gets rejected for that reason. It's a bizarre thing, but most people reject this because it seems too simple and therefore it must not work because we like things that are complex. So, you're absolutely right. It's simple, but it's actually, the most accurate thing you can do as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's you break it down. It's makes sense.
So, what's the first thing you would do with this after we hang up this call?
I'll probably drag out a profit and loss and look at those numbers.
Yeah, P&L.
Yeah.
P&L, and figure out what your percentage of material is against revenue, but you've got to do this over a period of time, and figure out what your overhead costs are. Don't be afraid to contact me if you have any questions. I'll be more than happy to help you. If you would like a copy of this spreadsheet, send me an email or drop me a line, and I will send you the Excel spreadsheet. That could be quite valuable.
Yeah, I will do for sure. Yep.
David's saying P&L definitely needs to be looked at more often. What do you feel about that, Shanoa? Do you think that something you look at more often now?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, definitely after seeing this.
Yeah, think of it like your car dashboard. You need to know if it's going to blow up or if it's going well.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. All right. Any other questions or comments from anyone? So thanks everyone for attending. Hopefully you got some value from that. I know for people that I work with, we actually work with people implementing this. It's the theory that I'm showing you here is it's great, but sometimes when you get to implementing, you need a little bit of help. And sometimes that help can get you somewhere where you want to go a whole lot quicker. Don't be afraid to contact me and ask. Even if it's just a question, go ahead and do that. Thanks everybody for attending. I'm going to wrap up the call if there's no other questions.
No, just thanks, Bruce. Appreciate your time, mate, and sharing the information.
Yeah, not a problem at all. I'm glad I can help. And again, like I say, I'm here. I'm always here if you have any questions. Feel free to reach out. All right, everyone. Have a great day. Chat to you soon. Have a wonderful day. Thanks for attending. Bruce from the Joinery Coach. Peace out.